How do you get the parts into your system to be able to do the match? And that's sort of where our secret sauce is, where we're able to work with the vendors to be able to ingest their data such that it's done in a very automated fashion. And we have sort of our technology is what matches it and allows us to do the data cleansing and so on and so forth, and be able to provide that data to customs brokers as required.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
So we're kind of reaping a little bit of the rewards of that conference we went to. We're still gaining some more audience, more followers, etc., which is really good. You know, we still encourage people to have us on their feed by following us and, you know, rating us. Again, any rating is good for us. You know, that way we know we're doing good or bad. But I wanted to say we also are picking up and still have some great people we met at the conference, and today's episode is going to be one of those where we met this next guest. We met him at the conference, and he was, really wanting to get on the show, but of course we ran out of time or whatever. We were all working booths and sponsorships and everything. So, but anyway, so we have a guest that really interesting topic. It kind of follows or flows into what we've talked in the past. We had a few episodes on supply chain, and so
we had some good ones there at the conference. We were, for those listening, again, we were at the ICPA conference in the Dallas area, the fall conference as they had it. And I mean, Lalo, I'll tell you, that was our first, if you will, I guess, public event since we've launched our podcast. And it was very humbling because there were people that came up and were, had been listening to us, and it was great. And since then, we've had an increase in people downloading it, subscribing to our podcast and whatnot. So, Lalo, on behalf of Lalo and the Global Training Center and all that, I want to reach out to our listeners for a second. Thanks. Thank you for what you're doing. We are, seem to be on an upward trend here for listenership. And that said, I just, please pass the word, because we are getting to a point where we need a little help to get pushed to the next level up. But so far it's been great. And I'm looking forward then to, in follow up, like you said, Lalo, for today. And folks, as far as all the things that we're talking about, today's show is going to be something where if you're an executive or upper management, you've got a staff that you want to empower them with the right systems, knowledge, skills, and things of that nature, and teamwork effort. But a key element of that is visibility to what you've got, and what's in your pipeline, what's coming in, what are you going to be doing, so that you're, even from an operations perspective, if you know what's coming, you're able to plan for it. You're able to handle it. You've got staffing and schedule set. From a compliance standpoint, what am I dealing with? Is it, if I've got so much money that I'm going to have to spend on duties and taxes, what about from an accounting perspective? What about from an entry quality perspective? Have we got the T's crossed and I's dotted? So having that visibility, I think, Lalo, is going to be one of those things that's going to be phenomenal as we start looking into, the supply chains and managing it. It's more than just import export type stuff. It's more of, you have to literally manage what you've got on behalf of your company. So I'm looking forward to this. Why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah. So we have here on the podcast, we have Grant Sernick, if I think I got that right, but Grant, he'll correct me, but he's from Third Wave. He's I've seen him for many years out there in the for the sponsorships for the ICPA conference. So, Grant, welcome. Thanks for coming on our show, and also for coming up on at the conference and introducing yourself. Thank
Well,
you so much.
I want to thank you guys for having me on the show, but also thank you guys for doing what you're doing. We were chatting just a little bit offline before we started, and I really think you guys are doing a real service for the industry. The guests that you have on are real and have real stories to tell and real knowledge to share. And I hope that I can live up to what you guys have been working on thus far. And I'm really excited to be part of this podcast and help in whatever way I can, because I think there's certainly a lot of lack of understanding and misconceptions and just complications, generally speaking, in the international trade and transportation space. And the better we collectively can understand how it works and propose solutions to solve real problems, I think we'll all be better off. And if I can help with that in any way or be part of it, then I say, amen to that.
Grant, let's jump in here on some things. Is that we're talking about as far as the supply chain. So first off, with your company, it's Third Wave,
Correct.
right? That's how we
Yep.
say it. All right. So right off the bat, let me ask it, who is your main contact as far as your clients then goes?
Yeah. So they would generally fall into one of two categories. Either the head of international transportation, which could be in the guise of like a director of international transportation or the manager of international transportation, something like that. Or it could be a trade compliance professional who needs to manage their international trade compliance and or self-filing operations. And self-filing, something that Third Wave enables. We automate that process to really make it a reasonably straightforward thing. There are a number of different advantages that you get from being able to self-file your customs entries, not the least of which is cost savings. But as far as being agile and being aware of where your products are and that you have customs clearance and so on and so forth. And so the companies that have that kind of challenge where they want to know immediately when their goods are released, the best and fastest way to do that is to self-file your entries and get the response immediately as to whether or not it's customs released.
All right, so let's take that. The one thing that I like what I was hearing right off the bat is you're talking about transportation folks and compliance folks. So both of them, and I would assume even though you may have a primary contact or a primary sponsor from one function or the other, the compliance end or the logistics transportation end, it sounds like with your process, you just about any entity or department probably would have access to the system in an appropriate manner, right?
That's right.
So they can.
No, that's exactly right. I mean,
okay.
so here's the thing that I think a lot of companies lose. They sort of lose the story as to what is happening in their inbound supply chain, and it really is inbound to an extent. It's outbound, but it's less of an issue on outbound as it relates to transportation or supply chain and trade compliance, and that is that in your inbound supply chain, you're moving goods through a shipment of some sort, whether that's a container or it could be any kind of move, and inside that container is product, and when that's moving, what you're doing when you're declaring an entry for customs purposes is translating the goods that are inside that container shipment through a language into a language that customs understands so that they can process your duties and fees and taxes and so on. But it's the same thing. They're the same products and they need to be consistent. I mean, the whole point of trade compliance is to be compliant against the regulations, but the regulations say that the products that you're moving in must be the products that you declare. That it's the same information, just translated, right? And so most companies manage those two processes totally separately, right? You have a transportation group that's moving transportation units. If they're containers, they're containers or whatever. And then you have separately a trade compliance group that manages their customs brokers who are operating totally independently And somehow, some way, that information is meant to somehow reconcile and be consistent. And we all know, because we've all had to deal with data in two different systems, that the odds that those two data sets are going to remain consistent, especially when there's a translation of some sort that needs to be imputed into that they're going to be consistent and reconcilable is pretty close to zero, right? And so within the trade compliance world, there's this whole thing about, oh, are you auditing your customs entries, and how much are you auditing, and how many data elements do you audit, and so on and so forth. Third Wave's perspective is, hey, wait a second. It's the same data. It just needs to be translated. It should all be done together. And then if you have that information and you can translate it really easily, well, it's just a click of a button to actually file it with customs, right? And so, yes, you get to cut out the customs broker middleman if you want. I mean, you can also just send the data to your customs broker and say, hey, file this on our behalf. But it's a much easier process to both keep consistent and also streamline your process and work together, transportation and trade compliance, to have one single view of the world. So that's sort of
all right. With that said, okay, that's that. But with all due respect, that's a panacea. You mean to tell me that you're going to go and try and get people together in the different areas? So here's the big challenge. I mean, one of the I'll say this, for example, is you're talking about the imports, and with the imports, there's usually like a factory somewhere offshore. That factory was sourced by your, let's just call it the purchasing, but the sourcing or purchasing folks. And so a purchase order was issued, and it says you're going to make 10,000 widgets. We will order them up at 500 widgets at a time. We'll tell you when, where to ship it, and all of that. And as it comes in, the scenario there is usually then you've got the logistics folks that have been pulled in to negotiate whatever transportation contracts with whatever mode that they are moving in, whether it's ocean or air, if it's an offshore scenario and all that. It gets to the States. It could be, a multimodal scenario where it goes ocean, rail, truck to the final destination. However, all that's fine, well and good. And then you got the customs brokerage piece that's over here, and oh yeah, we got to get it cleared and whatnot. 9 times out of 10, I always hear the broker or the import compliance folks will complain about the paperwork, or they'll say, don't use the information on the manufacturer's paperwork that they put from the factory. And I always ask the question, well, why is that? Oh, you can't rely on it. They just put anything down. And I was like, well, no, wait a minute. Why are you not putting all of the required information on that paperwork up front? And they're going, we don't have control over our vendors or over our suppliers. And I'm like, time out. If you're a compliance person, your company has found this and sourced it out. There's a purchase order issued and all that. They know what to ship, where to ship, when to ship it, and what to put on the paperwork so that they get paid for those goods, right? Therefore, it sounds like you've got control. The compliance folks have not been able to exercise any set of influence here in this. So the question I've got for you, because purchasing is looking for bigger, better, faster, cheaper. Transportation is looking for quick cycle times and low transportation rates. Customs compliance is looked at as if they're the stepchild that always gets in the way of everything and hangs things up, right? Yeah. So how are you talking about with your systems and your processes? How do you get everybody to play in the same sandbox without getting upset?
Yeah, well, firstly, we gotta hire you, Andy, because you explain the inbound supply chain in a scenario better than I possibly could. But it's exactly as you said. I mean, you're placing an order with a vendor overseas, and the first thing I think to note is that I appreciate sort of your perspective on compliance. Like, you're in compliance, and you should be able to get your vendors to be compliant. But the simple fact is the vendors overseas come in a lot of different flavors, right? And you have, if you're Walmart, okay, you can get your overseas vendors to jump. If they want to play with you, you get them to jump. But if you're not, then your ability to really impact them and what they're able or capable of doing is variable, right? You oftentimes don't have control over that. And so from a third wave perspective, we sort of take the perspective we don't get to choose who our customers get to play with. And we have to imagine that the scenario that they say where we don't have control over what they send us and that information isn't particularly good or correct or relevant, whatever the case may be, has to be taken at face value. And so what they're really saying is, listen, I'm sending you 500 widgets, as you said, and there might be an HTS code on that paperwork, but it's not their job to have the right classification on it. It's my job as the importer of record to say, oh, this widget that I am importing as the IOR has this HTS code. And if it doesn't match with the paperwork, fine. I would say more often than not, there just isn't an HTS code on the paperwork. How about that? But so somebody has to classify it. And the bigger problem is not on the vendor side where they're putting the wrong HTS code. It's on the broker side where the importer has their database of product and they will be sharing that with the broker. And for some reason, whatever that is, those two databases are not consistent or in sync. And now all of a sudden you have a problem where they're filing product on your behalf with the HTS code that they have, which doesn't happen to be right for any number of reasons, right? And so our perspective would be, hey, listen, the vendor is going to tell you what they're shipping you, the quantity, the SKU, whatever it is. They have to be able to define that. And they would know that. Now, when that information comes in, you have to be able to marry what they're sending you with your HTS codes and databases, duty rates, free trade agreements, whatever else there is that's involved in that, to then be able to either send that to your broker so that they're filing the correct information or file it directly with customs. And that's so third wave. So the trick then is, okay, well, in order to provide the HTS code and match that or marry that to a part, how do you get the parts into your system to be able to do the match? And that's sort of where our secret sauce is, where we're able to work with the vendors to be able to ingest their data such that it's done in a very automated fashion. And we have sort of our technology is what matches it and allows us to do the data cleansing and so on and so forth and be able to provide that data to customs brokers as required.
Hey everyone, we're getting ready for another annual ICPA event coming up the week of March 12th in Orlando, Florida. If you have been thinking of attending any of the ICPA conferences, this is the one you should not miss. There will be more sessions than any other conference with a guaranteed sellout, so hurry and get your tickets today. We are also excited to share that Simply Trade podcast will be in attendance and we want you to be part of our show. Listen to episodes 14, 15, and 16 to find out why you can't miss this conference.
All right, Grant, let me stop for just a second. I want to interject something here, especially for our listeners. If you are a newbie, a rookie, somebody that has gotten thrown into this mix, and you're going through and trying to, especially if you've been put in charge or in management, you step into any kind of form of management, whether it's logistics, compliance, or whatever, one of the backbones of import processing is talking about the classification, and Grant alluded to the classification, any special tariff treatments, such as if you're going to use the USMCA, which is NAFTA 2.0, as some people call it, GSP, or some other special, Israel, U.S. free trade agreement, Australian U.S. free trade agreement, any kind of free trade agreement. So you've got the classification, you've got country of origin, you've got part numbers, you've got, whatever. The question I was just going to say is that as we're talking through this, you need to be looking to see, well, how does our company do this? Is it manual? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it something that is done systemically? And if so, where does the system get the information from? So as we're talking through it, I want you to give that some perspective. If you're an executive, you need to look in that. And what we're talking about in particular is if I always propose this with every company I've ever dealt with. If you're a high level executive you need to have a meeting with your purchasing, with your transportation, and with your compliance people all in the same room, and talk through that, and maybe even have your systems people so they can figure out what systems each of them are using, so that you can find out, is there synergy between those three? So in looking at it, if there is, you're going to have a smooth supply chain generally. If there is not synergy and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, you're going to have problems. So Grant, coming back to this, sorry for that, little tidbit, but I always like for people to know, is like, well, what the heck, we're talking about something that's going over my head. Let me give some context to that. All right. So with this, you have your systems. You're talking about being able to pull this stuff together. You're talking about getting information from, vendors or sources or, like manufacturers or whatever, running it through your systems and process. So take us through real quick an ideal situation. Like everything's working together. It's everybody's together. So it's like, and if I were a client of yours,
Mm-hmm.
I want the whole ball of wax, dude, man. I mean, give me the whole herd here of everything that you can offer. What is it that's that you're able to provide and go through? Let's go through literally a process.
Yeah, sure. So the process that we manage goes from the purchase or the issuance. So the purchase order is typically issued, as you said, in some kind of ERP system, Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, whatever. And Third Wave would capture that purchase order, and that forms the foundation of all the shipments from overseas that are going to come, right? Nobody's sending you stuff that you haven't ordered. And so we cover the process from the purchase order, receiving that purchase order, to the creation of the shipment. That's done in typically one of two flavors. Either someone overseas is going to advise that they're sending you a set of goods, and it's going to relate back to the purchase orders that they were ordered from, or you might instruct the overseas vendors to say, hey, I understand this stuff is ready. Please put this stuff in a container. Here's a booking number, or call this agent and arrange the booking. Put this product in a container. The container is going to go on its voyage from its origination point all the way through to being, to making it landing domestically. And Third Wave is connected to a service that provides a status updates as to the progress of that shipment as it goes on its voyage. Now we're at the port. It's arrived. It's been offloaded from the vessel. We got to clear customs. So Third Wave covers that process. And then it's got to be either, as you said, it could be multimodal. It could go on rail inland somewhere. So there are status messages, again, against rail that Third Wave is capable of capturing to provide one common view of that whole voyage of the container and the product inside that container. And finally, it's going to be drayed from some kind of port to some either a customer or a warehouse, and update, ordering drayage, understanding what's going on at the port, what has to be ordered, what is being ordered, the demurrage and detention that goes along with that, things of that nature. And we covered all the way to receipt and the receiving of a warehouse receipt from a warehouse, if you happen to have it, and then being able to compare that warehouse receipt to your customs entry, to a product invoice, to a freight invoice, to the purchase order and packing list and commercial invoice that was received for it. So all of it ties together. And if there are any errors along the way, we're able to highlight those such that you can deal with them immediately. And then you get rid of sort of your post-summary corrections and things like that, which is a trade compliance issue that is sort of a hassle that nobody wants to deal with. Is that clear?
Well, and yeah.
Yes.
And all right. So as we're going through this process now, let's talk about this a little bit. Is that when things are moving and the goods are in a container, in this case, obviously moving ocean, and as it's moving through, is your system working with transportation companies to track the movement of that shipment?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we use a service called Vision, Vizion.
Okay.
They're great.
Okay.
And what they do is they both aggregate all of the message sets from all of the various carriers, but then they also standardize them so that one of the things that you've probably heard a lot is, oh yeah, the carrier data is garbage. It's not. It actually isn't. The carrier data, for the most part, is pretty good. The problem with it are the messages that you get are sometimes inconsistent. You don't always get a message, but more importantly, they're not, the messages themselves are not consistent. So an outgate message from Maersk could be different from an outgate message from Hapag-Lloyd or CMA, CGM, or whatever.
And you're talking predominantly, one is format, the second is terminology, because of, Maersk used one thing, and CDMA, what is it? CGM,
CGM.
And I should know that because I used to work for Siva, who was acquired by them.
Right. Shame on you.
My apologies, guys. Oh my gosh, I'm going to catch grief over
That's
this. Right. I actually have to reach out to some of my former colleagues, so they're going to slap me upside the head on that one. Sorry. But all right, so the formats are different. The terminology could be different. Timing could be different. I get that. So what you're doing, one of the key things, is able to take this, and so people within the client's company would be able to set up, I'm sure, with their logons and whatever else, then the appropriate flags. I want to know something when it's hits the port. I want to know something when it's exported. I want to know something when there's a dollar amount. Okay, so they can filter out what they want. But as this stuff is moving through, and we're going through, that's fine. I guess the question is that as this data is moving through, you're then able to if there's a transaction going, you're able to have somebody execute a transaction that will just, in this case, let's just say that we're using a customs broker. You can be a self-filer. That's getting into a scenario where I always tell somebody, are you going to be a broker? Or are you going to, what's your company do? If your company is a manufacturer or a distributor of widgets, then focus on that. If you're going to be a broker, you got to really justify. You got to take that in. You got to have somebody's license over. But if you can send the information, then you can send it to your broker. So let's assume we're doing that. It kicks it off. Okay, all that goes through. Then you have the electronic information where the 7501 data, after you've got a release, they confirm with a 7501, it comes back through your system. So with that, assumingly that when that comes into your system, it is able to reconcile that entry with the bill of lading that goes into the transportation side and says, okay, from an invoicing perspective, it went through. We have a transaction. From any purchase orders, you can assume somehow you're tying that in. And with that, and then the entry itself with the duties and taxes and the payments. So there's an audit trail that depends on which fork of the tree it goes into of accounting, transportation, compliance. You've got within your system is able to direct somebody to the right data, and it pulls it all together.
You got it. That's exactly what the system does. Now, can I mention one more thing?
Nice.
Sure. So one of the things that's often missed from a visibility perspective, because you were mentioning track and trace as status messages, it's the status message that isn't received that ultimately is the problem. And you have to be able to understand the plan of what you're doing so that you can understand when a message is not received to know that something is out of whack. So an example of that would be on demurrage. The way you know what is on demurrage is that you have an off gate or an offload from the vessel message, right, which starts a demurrage clock, and the demurrage clock ends at the out gate. Okay, and the delta between them is the time that it was in the port, and if that number is greater than the free days that you have, you've incurred demurrage. Okay, so the problem is that if you haven't received an outgate message, it could mean that it hasn't been outgated, but it also could mean that you haven't received an outgate message and it has been outgated, and you don't actually know which one is right. And so what you want to be able to do is understand that an outgate message should have occurred so that when it doesn't occur, you now know that you should look into that. Right.
So what you're going, let me rephrase where you're going with this, is that your system in the processes is able to identify whether you're getting messages or there's a lack of messages or somewhere in there. you're able to put parameters in to identify exceptions.
Correct.
So if there's an exception that comes up, it's like, well, now I need to take action. Do I need to go find the information and find out what's going on? Or is it a case of we know what's going on and now we need to deal with it so that you don't become that proverbial pooper scooper at the end of the parade, as I always say.
You got it. That's exactly right. And that happens along the entire voyage where there are messages that might or might not be received, and you have to be aware of what's going on.
Okay. All right.
I guess this is kind of important. I want everybody to know that, for one, this is Third Wave is not a sponsor of ours. I mean, we didn't get paid or anything to do this. I mean, we decided to put this show on because we keep on talking about supply chains, logistics, trade compliance, etc. And Andy and I have had this conversation before. But how do you put that into action, like in an automated way? And then Andy said the other day, he had a really good point. He said, well, I mean, there's obviously software out there that can do stuff like this. Let's talk to some of these vendors and some of these providers. And it's kind of like, what did you say, Andy? Like a mechanic? If you're learning how to fix an engine, you got to have some engine there. Yeah, I mean, you got to have an engine there to fix that. And then if Ford happens to donate that engine, that's what you're working on. Everything else is similar. It's not the same, but it's similar. So same thing here. I mean, we want to make everybody aware there's software and solutions. We're not just telling you, hey, comply with your imports, comply with, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we do that in all the other shows, but we also want to let you know there's something out there, and be it Third Wave or anything else that you might go after. Don't think that when you say I'm automated, or believe me, I was in the GTM field for 25 years, and I used to walk into customer sites and I used to say, so y'all don't have anything automated for your whatever invoices or whatever, and they would say, yeah, we do. And they showed me their automated system. It's Excel. that doesn't mean you're automated. Right. You know what I mean? But anyway, so that's what I'm trying to say. I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're not getting paid for anything like this, or it's just we click really well with Grant, and we thought we'd bring him on the show.
Yeah, and we're wanting to highlight, different service providers and things of that nature. So here's the one thing is that, folks, check out Third Wave. This is going to be worthwhile because Grant's, we're only scratching the surface here of the capability. I wish we had a little bit more time to really dive into this. But all said and done, there's some opportunities here that basically, Grant, what you're offering here with your services is a way for companies, more specifically the transportation and the compliance with the adding in of the purchasing, the accounting, the executive leadership, and different things. That you're a tool that would help people to work smarter, not harder. Would that be a good synopsis?
You got it. So can I give you one last quick story that maybe will resonate? Yeah. So what's amazing I find today is how when we talk to people, and this was represented, we didn't realize this until we actually started digging into this. Just about all of our customers started this way. When we got there, they had file folders, and each file folder represented a shipment of some sort. And one of our customers, especially, they had special file folders made, right? It had a checklist on the cover. And there were about 30 steps on that checklist, and every container would go through that checklist. Yeah, and so they would take it, and it was like a football, and they would pass it around the organization. If something had to be approved, it would go over to the approval person's desk, and then transportation would have to be managed, and so on and so forth. And it's crazy how we live in 2022. And that's still the de facto mode of most companies. Yeah. And out of anything that we talked about today, I would say that if you are running a business or running a department that is following that process where you have a folder that is being passed around like a football, then you really ought to come talk to us, because it isn't so expensive to get off it. And the benefits are so staggering that it's our job is to help you solve that problem more than anything else in the world. It's that problem in particular. So that's just something that we just realized this a couple weeks ago.
Well, and also to all the folks out there that are listening, don't be afraid of, automation, if you will, or systems and people coming in going, well, it's going to eliminate my job. Or it's like, no, 99% of the time you're able to put your expertise or apply your expertise to the problems and the areas that need it versus, just pushing paper or moving electronic paper, as I call it, digital stuff that's just a transaction. So, all right, Grant, one quick question. If you could go back in time and talk to your 21-year-old self, what would be one of the key things you would tell yourself regarding this industry?
Oh boy, regarding
whatever.
Regarding whatever. Well, I would say probably two things that might seem counter. So, 21-year-old self, be way more patient when you're young, and soak up as much as you possibly can as you go through life, because there's so much to learn, and there really isn't a race to status or to money, notwithstanding you think that it is. And so just be patient as you go through, and that will be rewarded in time. And I guess maybe it's sort of a similar point, is like, my favorite saying is the days are short, or sorry, the days are long, but the years are short. And I really, really believe that, especially now that I have kids that it's hard to believe that my oldest son's turning 16. Like, the time just went by in a snap, and it seems like when you're in the moment, you're in hard times or things are tough or whatever, but you look back and it's like, holy cow, that all that time just disappeared. And so, that doesn't have to do with supply chain, but it kind of does apply to the supply chain as well, because there's so much to learn in the supply chain. I've been here for 10 years, which is crazy. That's gone by in a snap. And it's so complex, and there's so much to learn. And I'm, so lucky to have people like, you, Andy, and you, Lalo, that, and a whole host of others that have been there and you can learn from, and you're willing to put yourselves out here on this kind of podcast to help educate people. It's like never been a better time for this. And we don't have enough of you guys around. And so I really thank you for that.
Well, Grant, thank you. This has been, like Andy said, there's just so much information that we definitely can ask you back to have you back. Or what we do with Global Training Center, we invite people to, if you want to showcase your product, or we can do a demo day and invite all our clients and everything, have them show up and do a 1-hour webinar or something. So we can work on something like that so you can showcase your product a little better. But for now, thank you so much for this information. It was very informative. And like I said, it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? It's just so much stuff. So, well,
hey, guys, I can't thank you enough. And I loved the opportunity to work with you guys, however, with your customers, demo day, however, I'm great that we have this relationship now, and I'd love to come back and talk about other things if you'd have me. So thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situation. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.